So in this video, we're going to talk about different kinds of muscle tissue a little bit more. We've talked a lot about skeletal muscles and skeletal muscle structure, but we haven't talked about the fact that there are actually different kinds of skeletal muscle cells or muscle fibers. So one type is what we call a slow twitch or a type 1 skeletal muscle fiber. These are always oxidative. They're doing aerobic respiration. They are resistant to fatigue. They're red fibers. They're red in color because they have lots of a protein called myoglobin. And myoglobin is like hemoglobin in that it's a protein that can combine with oxygen, but instead of transporting oxygen, it stores oxygen so the cells can stay in that aerobic state longer. Has a really good blood supply to bring in oxygen, nutrients, get rid of waste products. It has lots of mitochondria, which is where most of the ATP and aerobic respiration is made. And there are what we call fast twitch glycolytic fibers or type 2B fibers. These are white fibers because they have less myoglobin. Myoglobin, again, is that protein, that pigment that when it combines with oxygen has a reddish color like hemoglobin. A poor blood supply, so it's not able to get as much nutrients, as much oxygen, get rid of waste as easily. So they're more susceptible to fatigue, fewer mitochondria, but they can contract much more quickly, much more strongly than the slow twitch fibers, which are going to contract more slowly, not as strongly, but can contract for a much longer period of time. So these are anaerobic fibers much of the time. And then there are kind of these intermediate fibers, these fast twitch fatigue resistant fibers or type 2A fibers. They are usually oxidative. They have an intermediate amount of myoglobin in between the slow and the fast glycolytic. They're kind of a pinkish or reddish color, again because they have more myoglobin than the fast twitch glycolytic, but not as much as the slow twitch fibers. They are more resistant to fatigue than the type 2B fibers, but not as much as the type 1. Okay. So that's kind of it for skeletal muscle tissue. And then there are smooth muscle tissues or smooth muscle fibers. So the cells in smooth muscle. So compared to skeletal muscle fibers, they are shorter. They have one centrally located nucleus as opposed to the multiple nuclei in skeletal muscle. They're elongated with tapered ends, whereas the skeletal and cardiac are more cylindrical shaped, so they're more spindle shaped. They have lots of their myofilaments are randomly organized, so they don't have striations that we see in the cardiac and the skeletal muscle. They don't have T tubules, and the sarcoplasmic reticulum are not as well developed compared to skeletal muscle. Now there are different kinds of smooth muscles. There are what we call visceral smooth muscles, or single unit smooth muscles. These are things that where, even though there are lots of cells, they act as one big unit instead of a bunch of individual cells. They form sheets of muscle fiber. The fibers are held together by gap junctions. They have a rhythmic characteristic where they contract in a pattern or a rhythm, like with peristalsis in the esophagus would be an example of that. They're found in the walls of most of your hollow organs, basically your digestive tract, your urinary tract, things like that. And then there are the multi-unit smooth muscles. They're less organized. They function as more separate units. Instead of all the cells working together, they work more individually. The fibers, like I said, the fiber cells, the iris of your eye is an example. This allows us to have precise control of how much dilation we have of the pupil. The walls of blood vessels, again, we can precisely regulate how much constriction or dilation there is in the blood vessel wall to help regulate blood pressure. Smooth muscle contractions work very much like skeletal muscles. There's interactions between actin and myosin. They both require calcium to form cross bridges and ATP to provide the energy. They get signals from the nervous system, which triggers a membrane impulse or a signal in the membrane of the muscle cell. Smooth muscles don't have the troponin that the skeletal muscles have. They use a different protein for calcium to bind to called calmodulin. There are two different neurotransmitters that affect smooth muscle as opposed to just acetylcholine for skeletal muscle. So along with acetylcholine, norepinephrine can also affect smooth muscle contraction. Hormones also can have an effect on smooth muscles. Stretching the muscle can cause contraction, like when the esophagus stretches, that triggers the peristalsis that pushes the food down to the stomach would be an example of that. Smooth muscles tend to contract more slowly, relax more slowly compared to skeletal muscle. They are more resistant to fatigue since they're not working as hard. They can change length without changing the tautness or the tension in the muscle. That doesn't happen in skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle, only in the heart. Fibers are joined by intercalated discs, which help with communication and allowing the individual cells to work as units. Again, one nucleus per cell. The cisternae of the sarcoplasmic reticulum are less developed compared to skeletal and store less calcium. Transverse tubules are larger compared to skeletal muscle. The fibers, again, are cylindrical, but instead of being one long cylinder, they can branch. So because of the communication and the connections, they work as units, like all the muscles in the right atrium contract together and the right ventricle and so on. They do have a unique characteristic of self-exciting. The heartbeat, or the contraction of the heart, comes from cells in the heart, not from signals from the nervous system like in the other two types of muscles. Now, the nervous system can regulate, can speed up or slow down, but it doesn't actually cause the heart muscles to contract. They also have rhythmicity. They have a longer refractory period. This chart in your textbook, Table 9.2, summarizes the three types of muscles, tissues, their characteristics, and so on.